Perfect.
Well, let me get this live stream link out and we'll get started.
Are
Just
you
real
using a
quick,
physical monitor over
guys.
there?
Let me see here.
Because if you can use a virtual monitor, like you can just have it in the
You guys should be able to hear Annalise right here. She's also one of my business partners.
Hey guys, just real quick before you start, if you guys have any questions towards the end of the presentation, please send them my way. I'll be allowing you guys to raise your hands, but we're going to filter through some of the questions so Rich can answer them. So just message me whenever you guys have questions so I can send them to Rich. So is anybody familiar with blockchain investigation and all those kind of task force? Kinda, so, not really.
No,
So,
really. Wait,
this
what are you talking about? Sorry,
who
go ahead.
who's okay. I was asking if anyone's familiar with blockchain task force and investigation and all that. The guys who kind of take care of the cryptocurrency that I don't want to say disappears, but let's say gets lost on an exchange, or an exchange shuts down, or there's a bunch of hackers that come your way, like for instance the city of Dania Beach in my state of Florida. um, there was a pair of guys who were asking for, I think, $600,000 in Bitcoin for ransomware, for them to turn back the city computers. So that's essentially what Rich does. He takes care of those cases in this space when those things happen. What do you do when those things happen? Has anybody familiar with I guess that field of the blockchain space, the legal side? Yeah, it's a very it's different because it's basically the aspect of cryptocurrency that we say, like, oh, it's anonymous, which it's not completely anonymous, and he'll kind of explain how to do some back tracing and how to find these people or possibly get pointed in the right direction, because it is tedious. I've talked to other investigators in the past that have given me some insight, so it's a really interesting process on how they do it. And it's kind of necessary because, as we know, cryptocurrency is kind of just anonymous. It's supposed to be in the nature of not being so easy to trace back, but you can, because obviously we have the blockchain and it's a database and it records everything. So you can technically follow the trail, but it's kind of interesting how they do things. But I'm excited to hear what he has to say in a few minutes before we get started. But I'm assuming are you in Pittsburgh too, Rich? Or are you out in Philly or Pennsylvania? Sorry.
I am in Pittsburgh. I do travel a fair bit, but Pittsburgh's definitely the home turf.
Pittsburgh is cool. I actually haven't been out to Pittsburgh. I've been out to uh, Philly
Philadelphia.
a few times. Yeah, I've been out to Philly a few times. I haven't been out to Pittsburgh. I'll have to make my way down that way, but you
All
know.
right, let's go live. Ready? Ready, Rich?
Yep, let's do it.
Transition. And we're live. How's it going, guys? Again, I'm Jerome from Bits and Tokens, bitsandtokens.com. We're here in blockchain universe, a virtual reality world for conferences, expos, and events. You're watching live on YouTube. I'm here with Rich Sanders of Cypherblade. Welcome, Rich.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
He's like, no. He's muted. Rich, why are you muted?
He's probably
That was
explaining right
strange.
now, but
It
we
seemed
can't
to.
hear him.
You should be okay now.
Is it working now? It seemed to mute me as soon as you went live.
You're good?
Okay,
Tell us a
cool.
little bit about yourself.
So I'm Rich, as you all had already introduced. I am the lead investigator and one of the co-founders of Cypherblade. Cypherblade is a blockchain investigative agency, and we're most well known for scam and hack investigations in the blockchain space. We also provide consulting services to law firms, security consulting to blockchain companies such as exchanges. And yeah, that's a quick bit about what I'm doing. And in the past, I spent 12 years in the Army, and I have an adorable cat and dog and love animals.
Nice. So how did you come to start Cypherblade? What got you to this point?
Super condensed version of the story is that I had been involved in cryptocurrency since 2013. And in 2017, I was working in a entirely unrelated to investigations and operations role for a blockchain firm. And I'm sure most of you are on Telegram and you've seen the impersonation scammers. And of course, this firm
Absolutely.
had their own impersonation scammers that were targeting the community. And it actually kind of became a meme that I would just kind of mess with these impersonation scammers and get them in all sorts of trouble. And one day, completely out of the blue, I'm visiting a friend of mine at the local Veterans Affairs Hospital, and my phone just starts ringing off the hook. And I notice it's Telegram audio calls, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And long and short of it is that there was an individual that had known me through the community, but this had nothing to do with the project I was working with, that was freaking out that he lost about $2 million in Ethereum, and he had no idea who else to go to. And that
Right.
situation is that ultimately the person that was responsible was identified in under 3 days and the funds were recovered. And then since then, it was just purely word of mouth. If somebody had a situation of that nature, they would come to me. And it became rapidly clear I could not do this myself and somebody had to step up and make a model to combat this stuff. And that's how Cypherblade was born.
Fantastic. How often do you get people that are reaching out to you in regards to issues like this?
Every single day, multiple times. And that's kind of the unfortunate reality of the space is that there's so much saturation with these types of incidents, unfortunately. And there's so little in the way of resources, right? It's one of those things where even not looking at cryptocurrency, the majority of cybercrime actually goes unreported. And I forget the exact statistic for it, but I would wager that if you're talking about cybercrime that involves cryptocurrency, it's safe to say it's probably half of that.
Interesting. And then what's the typical platforms that you see those attempts on? Bitcoin, on Ethereum, which platforms?
You're going to see mostly Bitcoin and Ethereum, but it's one of those things where you have to look at the root cause of the compromise, right? So generally, what causes asset loss in this space is the compromise of a credential, such as a seed phrase, right? Or the compromise of a credential, such as exchange details. So, whatever's in there is going to get stolen and it's going to get liquidated and, converted along the path. Bitcoin and Ethereum is most prominent, but that's because Bitcoin and Ethereum are most prominent.
So I like that you brought up the seed phrase is one of the most common ways. For those that don't know about your seed phrase, if you get a Bitcoin wallet, there's a seed phrase that's given to you that you should have written down or saved, tucked away somewhere. How could someone prevent their seed phrase from being from that attack?
So this is where a couple of you are going to get some good chuckles here because it's very trivializing security and it's going to seem so common sense. But how many folks, by a show of hands here, own a hardware wallet?
Put up some emojis if you have a hardware wallet.
Okay, so hardware wallets are actually a fantastic example, right? So if you utilize a Trezor these days, it actually comes in the packaging with a book that says, please write this down, right? It's very clear. It says, I think it actually says, do not store a copy of this online or don't take a picture of it or something to that theme. So it's really just a matter of following the instructions. And it's not just hardware wallets, right? Some exchanges these days are actually requiring that you use two-factor authentication, and they will have very clear instructions like print this out, don't store this in Dropbox or Google Drive, your 2FA backup. So it's really just a matter of following the instructions. People kind of tend to overcomplicate security, at least on the individual level. And odds are, for the average end user, for the person that's not a very high threat surface, it's really just a matter of following instructions.
Interesting. So we're talking about your private keys and your, code, trying to keep those as tucked away and hidden so that way people don't find them. But how are people finding them?
Well, unfortunately, the reality of it is that it kind of ties into what I was talking about following instructions, right? And that's kind of the societal challenge that we're having right now for mass adoption of blockchain tech, which is the whole be your own bank thing. As a society, we're so used to the coddling of centralized protections and chargebacks and all these other things that can fight fraud. And unfortunately, yeah, I would love to see an innovation that challenges this. And I've seen things pitched that challenge this, but none of it really makes sense. The reality is that when you're being your own bank, you have to protect your own credentials, right? So it's when you're storing your own cryptocurrency, that private key is your baby. So are you going to store that behind something that can be breached so easily? Think of most of you probably utilize Gmail, for example, for your email provider. Are you using 2FA on your Gmail? How is your 2FA backed up? If you're not using 2FA, are you reusing a password, right? People overthink these cryptocurrency breaches as these super sophisticated hacks, and in reality, they're not. The majority of the cases I see, it's things like SIM swaps or even simpler, password reuse. There's been more than enough folks that I've seen, they utilize the same password pretty much everywhere. And that's the password that they had for their Gmail account. And their Gmail account is the keys to Google Drive. And then within Google Drive, where are they keeping their seed phrase, their private key? It's a lot simpler than folks tend to make it out to be.
Interesting. So I've had a friend that has been using Stone to be able to hide away his private keys in what's known as a Stone wallet. Have you heard a Stone book? Have you heard about like putting your keys and your seed phrase on a Stone wallet?
I haven't heard of a stone one. I've heard of multiple metal solutions. And here's kind of the thing, right? I'm a security realist. I'm not the person that's going to tell you that, if you're storing less than, let's say, $10,000 worth of cryptocurrency, that you have to keep it on metal and, only partially kind of do like a fragmented storage thing and part of it in a safe deposit box. That's excessive, right? You want to tailor the security you're doing to what your risk is and the amount of assets that you have. I think that metal solutions are pretty cheap. You can go to a Home Depot and get a piece of scrap metal and engraver it for under $20, and it's really more of a matter of time, right? So that's really the big obstacle to security for a lot of folks, is that they just want to focus on their trading. So they won't even follow the 60 extra seconds it would take to physically write down a seed phrase. They're just going to take a picture of it and put it on their phone. So anytime that you're adding a step to the security process, it has to be evaluated as what is the likelihood of the general populace utilizing this preventative measure as opposed to overlooking it. I think things like stone, what do you call it? Is it a stone book, or is it actually like some kind of physical stone solution?
It's like a stone encryption book. So it's like a book. The paper is made out of stone, so it's supposed to be heavy duty. And then you write in it with like ghost ink. So basically, you use a black light to actually see the ink come like, and then you encrypt everything's
I know
encrypted. So it's like
exactly
an
what you're
encrypted
talking about.
phrase. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I've seen that before on Twitter. Yeah, I mean, it's a great concept, right? And I encourage the use of solutions like that. But again, it's bearing in mind what is the likelihood. Those of you listening in right now, you might be likely to use something like that, but think of your friends and family and what is the likelihood of A, getting them to want to utilize cryptocurrency at all, and then B, taking the extra step of something like that. And I'm sure the answer in most of your heads is it's going to be pretty unlikely to have them take that extra step. But you have to encourage them to, right? And the big thing that we need right now in this industry is folks normalizing that. It has to be an expectation because otherwise we're going to continue to see this type of theft, and that's definitely a roadblock to mass adoption.
Fantastic. So for those that didn't hear or didn't understand, we were talking about, best ways to be able to hide your seed phrase and protect your Bitcoin or Ethereum wallet. I brought up the Stone Crypts Stone book, which is sheets of stone stored in a book. That way it can protect from fire, from water, from tears, anything like that. It takes a longer time for it to be able to degrade that material, and thus it's a lot easier to write down your information. He even has like a pen where it writes in invisible ink and he gives you a black light so that way you can hide your seed phrase in plain sight in a book. that's made out of stone. It's pretty interesting to me. Definitely check out Stone Crypts. It's one of my friends. He does blockchain worlds as well. We were at one of his events last night. Pretty cool what he's doing with seed phrases and making sure that you can be able to store them and protect your seed phrase, which it sounds like that's really important in this space since you're seeing people getting their wallets attacked every single day, right?
Absolutely. And you said Frontiers. Did you invest in Hex? I'm
I
kidding.
did
That
not
was a
invest in
short
Hex. I
joke
was
about
saying
Hex.
that the Stone Crypts stone book can protect from tearing. Like you can't rip
I think
the
somebody in the audience
stone.
got it. Yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down. It was just a joke about Hex. I think someone in the audience got the joke there.
Oh, I certainly didn't. Please share. What do you mean by with Hex?
Well, if you were investing in something like that, you could have been wrecked, hence the tears.
Mm.
Oh wow, correct. I've heard people gotten not great results on Hex. I've heard that a few times before.
Same
I
here.
can't say I've been following it too closely, but I mean, in the topic of cleaning up the space, right? People think of bad actors in the space exclusively as people that are conducting SIM swaps or stealing cryptocurrency outright. But the one thing that I've been noticing a lot more of the past year, and this is kind of a consequence of we had that bull run for a little bit, then we had the crash, and the crash kind of weeded out a lot of the newcomers that were trying to get rich quick. What you're seeing more of now is you're seeing more of, I would almost describe it as a white collar crime kind of thing, right? Where it's these kind of like soft exits. It's not so much these anonymous teams that never intended on doing anything at all whatsoever after they do a raise. A lot of the, like vaporware ICOs, IEOs that raise way more money than they actually need. And for example, you'll see in a white paper that they're supposed to spend $10 million on development, but they would never transparently demonstrate we spent this amount of money. They might outsource it at 20% of the cost, and ultimately what's happening with that kind of money. Hex is another great example of that. It's the kind of project in the space where it's brilliant in the sense where they're appealing to the get rich quick, right? But ultimately, if you kind of assess it for what it is, you've got somebody that has absolutely no place running a business at all whatsoever, let alone something within the blockchain industry. Um, there's really amusing interviews if you listen to some of it. Like there was one where he was talking to some attorneys, and he said that Richard Hart said his legal opinion was founded based upon things that he read on Wikipedia. So if that's what you want to invest in, go ahead and knock yourself out. But that's the kind of thing as an industry we need to be seeing a little bit less of.
I agree. How often are you dealing with attorneys versus clients, just regular people that are looking for help?
If I had to guess, that's probably about 50-50 now. And just for context on that, our work as providing expert witness services has grown drastically this past year. And a lot of it is cases against fraudulent or mismanaged ICOs or other blockchain projects. So that's definitely an evolving space. I think that has a little bit more to do with the fact that there's more law firms that are interested in the space in general. And I think that's a consequence of the 2017 bull run.
That
Yeah,
makes sense.
100%. Yeah, no,
Absolutely.
after 2017, things really, it was like scamming era left and right.
I mean, yeah,
Absolutely.
there's the scamming, but yeah, again, to be like super clear, you've got your outright scams, right? There was an ICO, I think it was called Proteum, and they're an example of what I would call an outright scam, right? They collected money and then they just shut down the website and ghosted, and that was never, a real thing, quote unquote, if you will, to begin with. The team members on the site were fake. I mean, that's just an outright scam. Then you've got a lot of ICOs where it's like they raise tens of millions of dollars and they just kind of, if you pay attention to their social media activity, it decreases as soon as the raise is over. It's not instant because then it becomes an exit scam. But you'll notice if you look at like Twitter analytics tools on some ICOs, it's very interesting to see the gradual abandonment of the project. So scams work both ways. And I think that's something that's not really known in this industry. People say scam and they think BitConnect, but they won't think of something like, you've got dishonest folks that are not being transparent and unfairly profit at all things.
Again, guys, you guys are looking at Rich Sanders from Cypherblade. We're talking about cybersecurity and blockchain. One of the things you just brought up was BitConnect, and that was probably one of the biggest scams that a lot of people in the blockchain space are familiar with. Can you tell the audience a little bit about, what you've analyzed from the BitConnect scheme?
So I'll preface this with saying, whether it's BitConnect or any other case, I can't give details on any investigation, ongoing or past. What I will say about BitConnect on kind of a higher level is that that's a fantastic example of quite a few different problems within the industry, right? So you would think that something like BitConnect would be a warning and a red flag to folks in the future. But if you think about more recent history, by show of hands, who's familiar with Plus Token, or there was one other one that was a big one, Nova Chain?
No.
Nova Chain.
So we got a
Okay,
couple
sounds
folks.
like
Those
she
were
knows
ones
that one.
that were a little bit more recent. Essentially the same model, right? You've got an aggressive referral program, invest this amount of money. I think Nova Chain, if I recall correctly, was pretty much exactly the same thing. We have a trading bot and it's making us money. You would think that the lessons learned from BitConnect, which is you can prove somehow you've got these balances, you've got a trading bot and it never happened. You would think that society would have learned from that. But it's in almost a diabolical sense brilliant by these folks that conduct these programs, because they know that at the end of the day, people are going to be clouded by greed. Somebody could read that BitConnect was a scam, but this is different this time, right? So no amount of, I mean, I feel like we could have 5 more BitConnects and we're always going to unfortunately have these Plus tokens and these Nova chains until, again, as a society and as an industry, we step up and call these things out for what they were. So, I could talk to you about all kinds of different things with BitConnect, but the one problem with it that we can fix as an industry is permitting it. So if you look at CoinMarketCap, they ran advertisements for BitConnect. I almost cringe bringing up certain names here, but like folks like Trevon James, we have to make them irrelevant because they go from BitConnect and then, they're having issues with the SEC and I recall distinctly Trevon James putting up a video on YouTube where he's talking about the SEC talking to him and he doesn't understand any of this legal stuff, but he doesn't want to get an attorney. And then I think it was mere months later, he was on to the next thing and now he's doing Hex, and it continues. And as an
I
industry,
didn't
we have
even
to
know
make these
that
folks
was him.
irrelevant. Well, I mean, it's almost one of those things where I cringe mentioning his name because it goes against making him irrelevant, but he's a fantastic example. He's not the only one. Those are the ones that just stop paying attention to them, stop retweeting them, stop commenting on them, weed them out of the industry.
You
Yeah, I
guys
think
hear that?
I feel the same when you say that, because I've noticed that and there's another kind of example. There was a guy I went to a conference about a year ago when everything was still open, but basically he was claiming at one point in time to be the co-founder of Bitcoin, and I didn't know that. He was a friend of mine, and he got called out at a conference. One of the guys there called him out and put him on video and told him to get out of here. He's a scammer. And when I heard that, like, you see these guys and they blend in with you every day, and they don't seem like they're harmful, but in reality, they've been around for years, telling people lies, feeding people lies, and it's really important to like see who these people are, and like, it's really important to do your own research even when you're making friends in this space, because you never know who's who. And next thing you know, here's people claiming that they were co-founder of Bitcoin, Satoshi's best friend. Meanwhile, their ex-wife is hitting them up on Twitter saying, that's a lie. He was a DJ, didn't even own a computer. So it's really funny how the truth comes out.
Absolutely. And a key phrase you said there is do your own research, right? And there's a lot of mantras that you hear in this industry, like do your own research, or not your keys, not your coins. I just hear them repeated all the time, and then these things continue to happen. I hear not your keys, not your coins, and then people are shocked when they have their life savings on an exchange that gets hacked or exit scams. Do your own research is a great one. And the great example I'll give you is that all of you listening in on this right now, statistically, you're the folks that are not going to be the targets of these hacks or scams because you're doing your own research. Simply by being here right now and listening to this, you're demonstrating that you care about things within this industry besides turning a quick profit, because this is not a discussion about what the price of Bitcoin is going to be next month or next year. I don't care about those things. I don't follow those things. So if you're listening in on this, you care about industry health and you care about security. So if you kind of analyze the motives, though, of most folks that entered the space, the folks that came in 2017 and registered on Coinbase. It's an unfortunate thing. It sounds bad to say, but their motive is to get rich quick. So these things like BitConnect, it made sense why they came across when they did. And hopefully, those of you in the audience, what you're going to do when you're inspiring folks to get into the space is really instilling that do your own research and follow these instructions. Take the 5 minutes to secure yourself. If you're going to invest a significant sum of money, then spend a few hours really looking into the project.
You guys hear that from Rich Sanders. That is well said. Really appreciate having you on here. Guys, if you have any questions, start hitting that button to raise your hand, and Elise will drop that in
Well,
there
actually,
soon.
I'm gonna enable the button for them to raise their hand. I've already approved one question, which is future SC. His question is, okay, guys, please send me your questions ahead of time so I can approve them. Just feel free to message me. I'm over here in the front, turning my head. So let me give you access to speak. Let me see here.
While she's doing
And
that and getting that person access to speak, I want to just recap some of the things that we spoke about today. We talked a little bit about Cypherblade. We talked about ways to protect yourself, protect your keys as well as your private wallet. We talked about different scams in the industry and things to pay attention to, and we touched a little bit about ways to really prevent just more attempts and attacks by being aware, doing your own research, owning your own keys. But is there any other way that we can really prevent a lot of these attacks and not try to go after them after the attack, but catch them before the attack, before the next scam?
Absolutely. And yes, please, I encourage that. So if I had one wish that was a result of doing this today, it's that nobody listening to this needs to come to me in the future saying I got scammed or hacked. I hope that if any of you contact me, it's because you're interested about something and have a question, or if anything, if you're going to come to me for a service, please have it be preventative security. And I could tell you this industry is going to be I think that the day that I will consider this to be a more mature space, one of the indicators is going to be that more people come to my firm before the fact than after. And the best way I can kind of answer what you were going for with that is the majority of the cases I look at, in fact, not the majority, every single case I've looked at, with the exception of major exchange hacks, let's say, could have been prevented with any one of several security measures that would have taken under 60 seconds. And it often fits the description of what I was talking about earlier. Properly setting up two-factor authentication is the big one. If you properly set up two-factor authentications, like you actually print or write out your backup, odds are whatever you're storing behind that is essentially untouchable to the overwhelming majority of bad actors in the space. And for almost all of you listening to this, if you just even take that step, you're a step ahead. I'm sure most of you have heard about SIM swapping, right? And if you simply had adequately set up 2FA on a Gmail account or an exchange, that's where the buck would have stopped. So there's a really good article if you Google SIM swapping Bible. That was something that I co-authored with My Crypto. And it's a long read because we go in depth, but the actual action items in that take a very small amount of time. Do it. I mean, I'm sure all of you spend at least a few hours per week, even if you're a hobbyist, reading up on this stuff. What's a few hours once to adequately secure yourself? It's free, so you might as well just do it.
Absolutely.
Cool. So I'm going to start with that question. I was wondering, I guess I have two now. One, how do you actually make money, or, you know, yeah, how do you make money securing people? Like, do you have a firm or a payment structure? I was just curious more about that. And two, you kind of just answered my question, but what are some reputable sources to look to just first get good news on the industry, and also how to secure yourself in any which way?
Sure. So I'll start with the question about the financial end of it. So I do have a firm. It's Cypherblade. If you're asking more specifically about how we're compensated, it depends
Yeah.
on the particular service. Obviously, for expert witness stuff, we're paid an hourly rate, just like any other expert witness service. For the scam and hack investigations, it's kind of a hybrid model. I mean, we do some level of contingency, but we also require upfront payment for our work. And that's because there's so many cases where if we worked on a pure contingency model, I could hire 100 folks right now and have them all be full-time, and we still would not be able to service everybody. And the unfortunate reality as well is that there is a fairly steep level of upfront time costs that goes into these things. And because this is a challenging space, despite the fact that the prospects of asset recovery are high, it's a somewhat lengthy process. So it is a hybrid model in that sense. And as far as reliable news, if you're referencing more on the topic of cybersecurity, you can feel free to follow my firm's Twitter or my Twitter. My Crypto puts out some really good stuff on this. Harry with them is an absolute trove of knowledge. There's some really good stuff that's put out by Chainalysis and CipherTrace. If you read some of the reports they put out, it provides good insights as far as high-level crime stuff. But if you're talking more on the kind of topic of personal security, I would keep that agnostic of the blockchain industry, and I would look more to general cybersecurity accounts. And Swift on Security is a hilarious Twitter account to follow, and it's not crypto specific, but they do address some pretty interesting topics that make you think. I see somebody seems to know who I'm talking about.
Cool. Oh, so I just wanted to do a quick reminder about, any acronyms you may use going forward. If you could just quickly, you maybe not define them, but just say what they mean or refer to. Just like 2FA, I didn't even know about 2FA. I thought SHA was the thing or whatever. But yeah.
Oh, sure. Never hesitate to ask, whether it's a security acronym or, I've got military background, so I'll throw acronyms out there on occasion when I don't catch myself. So
Gotcha.
don't hesitate to ask.
Cool.
Well, do you know what 2FA is now?
No, I'd love somebody to say something about that. By the way, we're usually muted, so we can't really ask questions in general. But yeah,
I
just
gotcha.
heads
So
up.
two-factor authentication is
Two-factor.
think of something
Okay,
you know
cool.
and something you have. Yep.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
something
Now
you
I
know,
understand.
something you have. Something
Cool.
you know is your password, right? Something you have is your second source of authentication. The thing with that, though, is there's two very common and another somewhat common but should be more common method of it. I want to go over these really quick because it's actually pretty important to the topic of theft of cryptocurrency. So a lot of you are probably aware of the fact that text message 2FA is woefully inadequate in this space because the amount of SIM swapping that goes on. But think about two things. Why do people use it, and why do service providers offer it? Well, people use it because they don't want to take the mere 2-3 minutes it would take to download Google Authenticator or Authy or whatever the solution they want to use is. I could take somebody in the audience right now that's never used it and time them, and even somebody that is brand new and really wants to read through it, you're looking at a 5-minute process. And if you're utilizing this, I'm going to break this down in the simplest of terms. If you're utilizing app-based 2FA, let's say Google Authenticator, that resides on your phone. So if you're SIM swapped, it's not like the person that takes over your phone number gets access to your Google Authenticator because that's essentially an app that's stored on your local device, right? The only way to defeat that is that if you improperly store the backup code for your 2FA, then it can be defeated. And think of it from the service provider's perspective, right? They will offer SMS-based 2FA because they know that their conversion rate will decrease if they only offer app-based 2FA. Now, there are some exchanges, and I'll actually give a big shout out to Bittrex on this one. They require you to utilize app-based 2FA. And despite this, people that register on Bittrex, there have been folks that have lost money from their Bittrex accounts despite 2FA because what do? Well, Bittrex is requiring them to set up 2FA, but what they do is they put their secret key for it on Google Drive on an account that's not protected by 2FA. So does that kind of answer your question on the importance of 2FA and what it is and what it does?
Totally. But you might as well explain SIM swapping while we're at it.
SIM swapping could be its a whole entire presentation, but
Okay.
SIM swapping it's super summarized. It's a method of attack where, let's say I know who you are by name and you have something I want, money, right? And if I have a reasonable guess that you're kind of relaxed in your cybersecurity, if I can conclude that if I had access to your phone number and I could reset things and I could steal something, that would be a motive to SIM swap somebody, right? And what a SIM swapper would do, there's one of two core ways that it happens. And up until about, I think, a year and a half ago, the most common way was that they would just call the mobile phone carrier and pretend to be you and request that your phone number be ported to a new device. And it's
Okay.
really, early on, it wasn't that hard to do, right? Because I could run some open source intelligence on you. And by the way, when I say open source intelligence, I'm not talking to like closed tools that someone like me would have access to. I'm talking about things like Spokio or Truthfinder or something that any of you can go utilize. And I can pull up your address. I can pull up your date of birth. So any of these generic identity verification questions that would be asked are just kind of made moot at that point. Um, it's one of those things as well where they might ask you for, what's your account's password. But if you look at some of these videos involving SIM swapping, it's actually kind of funny when you see red teamers do it, because you'll see, I could pretend with a voice changer to be your wife and say, I don't know the password, but, he's on vacation and I need to get in the account because I got to make a change for the bill, and, add a crying baby into the background. I've seen that one done before. And the service rep on the phone is going to feel pressured to do that SIM swap. Once that phone number is ported to, let's pretend I'm the SIM swapper here. Once it's ported to my phone, well, if you don't have app-based 2FA and if you have your phone as the way to reset all of your passwords on certain accounts, let's say you have a Gmail and, you only have SMS. If I reset it with that, your Gmail is probably the keys to everything else, or at least for a lot of for a lot of normal folks, their Gmail account is the keys to the castle. So I might immediately get a private key just from your Google Drive. I might be able to reset your Binance password through Gmail. So that's the common way SIM swapping happens.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Very welcome.
All right, we got one more question from BTC Kitty. You are next. Let me give you some mic access here. Go for it.
I don't know if you're basically I'm a little curious about the big Binance hack, and maybe you know something about it.
I had a hunch that at least one of the major exchange hacks would get addressed. So I can't say anything about that. What I can say is that I do applaud Binance for levels of transparency that they've had in certain things. And one big problem with the industry as well, if you want to kind of talk on the topic of exchanges, and this might disappoint you because I'm not going to talk about the actual Binance hack, but at least this might touch a topic you're interested in. There's a lot of exchanges that have experienced breaches and not reported it. And actually, it's not even just exchanges. I've seen this happen to VCs. I've seen this happen to ICOs. And that's a big problem because ultimately they'll end up running insolvent. So the fact that Binance took the steps they did is definitely worthy of commendation. And I could talk about exchanges for hours on end. I mean, I gave the example of reporting hacks. How many exchanges have you heard of? I mean, there's Cryptopia is one of them. There's a whole bunch of them where they're going to suddenly shut down for maintenance and then have all these excuses, and then it's just revealed weeks, months later. It's a real bad look.
And also about Authy. So as far as I understand, it is susceptible to SIM swap attacks. So it's actually very poor 2FA, no?
It depends on the settings you utilize within Alti.
Okay.
I know what you're talking about. There is a way where you can reset it through phone, but it's an option that you choose or not to choose.
Great question.
And actually, I can build off of that to something that's really handy for you. So I don't want to demonize the utilization of phone numbers as a method at all, because it's unfortunately, and this kind of shows, this is the only area I can think of where the blockchain industry is more mature and advanced than the banking industry when it comes to security. It's not almost, it is an expectation that app-based 2FA is offered on exchanges these days. As far as personal banking, I'm with USAA and they have all kinds of crazy security options. I've seen tons of banks that don't even offer app-based 2FA, and it really makes you scratch your head. So at least we've got that going for us as an industry.
All right, we have one more question over here from Josh. He has a question regarding some security. I will give you megaphone access. Go ahead, Josh.
All right, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Got you loud and clear.
So I run a crypto education YouTube channel called Chain Toots, and one thing I get a ton of is is spam comments from basically fake recovery scammers that claim if you lost your coins, that they can get them back for you. So I did a little mini investigation on them to kind of see what they try to get from you. And one of the things besides prepayment for service was they won't ask you for a password to get into an account, but they will try to get you to give them your two-factor authentication codes to do like a password reset. Can you talk a little bit more about things that you should never give people, like how some of these resets work using 2FA, and like how people try to socially engineer to get into your accounts? I just think that's an interesting security topic.
Sure. So first of all, I know exactly the type of comments you're talking about. They're all over comments on YouTube and on Quora and all these different sites. I've actually done some analysis of those types as well, and it's, for those of you that remember the Nigerian prince emails of the 90s, right? If you think about how absurd those emails were and just how the way they were formatted would make most of you listening very unlikely to fall for something like that. It was actually a self-selecting bias that was done deliberately, because the folks that would respond to that were the ones that were likely to fall for the scam, right? So they're doing the same thing, these folks that are trying to say that they're going to be able to assist you with recovery. I've looked at some of these folks before, and they'll like want to talk to you on Skype or Telegram, and the stuff they share, I mean, the screenshots I have are just absurd. I had one try to tell me that he could, I'm trying to remember how to verbatim quote him, triangulate the killer root Bitcoin address based upon IP triangulation. I mean, this dude was just copy and pasting something out of some horrible movie. I didn't even know where he was going with it. But to somebody that's desperate, if they have absolutely no context on what I do, and most folks are going to have no context on what I do, and they see a whole bunch of like computer screens with fancy looking graphs and codes, I mean, it could be believable when they want hope. So unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of them. I'm going to start with that first, which is if they're not a public facing person, and that's not just like having a LinkedIn, but if you haven't, trust but verify. Get on a call with them, get on a video call. Do they have a site that's reputable? Is the site new or has it been built out? What's their social media presence? So look at that. As far as the social engineering methodologies to get access, your question was more about credentials than sending money, to be clear. I mean, I guess like I want to answer your question the best here. So like, are you talking more about protecting your 2FA codes? Okay. And not so much about like, sending money to a scammer. So
Yeah, sorry,
exchanges say this all the time.
I was muted still.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Okay,
I'm
so
talking about
exchanges say
credentials.
this. Gotcha. So exchanges say this all the time, whether it's during the sign up or whether it's in periodic messages or emails. They'll say something like, we will never ask you for your password. We will never ask you for your 2FA code. And again, it's the kind of thing where most of you in the audience know this, or even most folks that are not familiar with the blockchain industry but are familiar with tech would know there's no practical reason to give somebody that works for an exchange your credentials, because they work for the exchange. They don't need your credentials, right? So that's kind of step one. Yeah, if something doesn't add up, put a level of scrutiny into it. It's, if these folks simply took the extra step instead of trusting the random support person that messaged them on Telegram of trust but verify, go to the exchange site and send them an email and say, hey, does this check out? There's no reason why anybody needs your private key or seed phrase. Zero. Never. Absolutely never. And I've seen that one a whole bunch too, right? There's a fork of Bitcoin and, it's too difficult or they don't want to take the time to figure out how to do it. So I've seen a whole bunch of, this was really big during like Bitcoin Gold. These websites that would offer to do it for you, and then guess what? Everything in your wallet's gone. So don't get greedy, trust but verify. You're not losing anything by not taking a step. You can lose something by taking a step. Does that make sense?
As my mom would always say, prevention is better than cure. Looks like Future Sec has a question. Hit the raise hand button, buddy. And I believe if you send your message to Annalise, she'll be able to verify your question before we ask it to Rich. Again, Richard, I want to thank you so much for joining us up here. And educating the audience more about protecting themselves, prevention, ways that you can secure your private keys, the scams to look out for, and actually doubling down on what Josh was saying, and asking in regards to, those spam bots that pop questions on Telegram, on YouTube. How do we prevent that or stop that from happening? I get those all the time. Can we be friends? And I'm just like, I know it's a bot and I'll just ignore it. But how do we get to the point where those bots just don't exist anymore?
That is going to be on the industry, not on the end user. And not even just the industry. I mean, think of the steps that YouTube has taken against this. They've actually focused more on, and I'm normally the one that would disagree with a lot of the YouTubers in this space, but they have focused more on cracking down on the YouTubers than the spam that takes place. I mean, even still to this day, you'll see promoted YouTubes that are live streaming that are just outright scams. Elon Musk giving away, 10x Bitcoin, whatever you send me. I see those promoted, and that's the kind of thing where it doesn't take much time to see that for what it is and shut it down. Some of it is on us as an industry. So the fact that we utilize Telegram as our primary communications platform is a problem. And this can get into the debate between, privacy, security, if folks want to be public facing or not. I would love to see an industry where something like Keybase is more the norm, because if I'm messaging you on Keybase, unless everything I own has been compromised, that is me. As opposed to Telegram, you have to do a little bit more due diligence. I think that there's some steps that we can take as an industry that kind of alter norms, and there's some steps that companies have to take.
Tell everybody about Keybase. I'm not aware of that one.
Keybase is a messaging platform where there's multiple, in layman's terms, multiple ways to verify you are who you are. So you can integrate it into your Twitter account. You can add PGP to it. You can do all kinds of different stuff so you can associate accounts with it.
Okay, so associating it with your other profiles, whereas Telegram doesn't associate with your profiles, which is why you're seeing a lot of scams and people that look like me, look like Annalise, asking you for money. Would that not happen on Keybase because of all of the verification methods?
Correct, presuming that you're, looking for all the integrations that a person would have on their profile, right? So like if I message you on Keybase, you're going to see this is linked into my Twitter, this is my PGP, as opposed to if you got a message from me on Telegram right now, you know, you would have to copy and paste my handle or somehow find my UID if you want to use one of those bots and compare it. And most folks aren't going to take that step. So it's just a
Very
little bit
true.
more clear once the person messages you. But again, it's the kind of thing where I was talking about earlier. How many folks are not properly setting up 2FA despite the instructions being right in front of them? How many folks are not writing down their seed phrase despite being provided a seed phrase book in the hardware wallet box with clear instructions that say, write this down, don't take a picture, don't upload it online. So it's kind of the same problem with Keybase. You can't even get a lot of folks right now to set up a cloud password for Telegram, and your integrations on Keybase are 6 or 7 additional steps on top of that.
Wow. Great information, some great content. Thank you so much, Rich. Last chance for any questions. Going once.
I don't know where Future. I guess he left, but he had a question. I gave him megaphone access, but he disappeared. I don't know where he went. If
Yep.
anybody has any last minute questions, just send me a raise your hand button and I will allow you to speak. Again, just for everyone in the audience, he cannot answer any questions regarding any current or past investigations, just to let you know. So anything specific regarding, some investigation, he can't answer. Anything else is up for grabs. So raise your hand now or forever be silenced. Or you can also find him on social media. Where can people find you if they're, interested in reaching out to you?
I was just going to say that.
So I would say reach out to my firm because we've got a lot of folks that are becoming even more awesome than I am. Of course, you're more than welcome to find me on Twitter. It's RainJobActual. But look at Cypherblade. And we've got a lot of folks that are rising stars in this industry, and I've just been the guy that's trying to blaze a new path for all of this. So
Anybody you
feel free
want to
to reach
shout
out to
out
my firm.
that's growing from your firm that we should, be aware of other than Rich? Who else from
I can't pick
Cypherblade do you
favorites,
know?
so I can't pick
You
favorites.
can't
However,
favorite.
I will say that Paul from my firm definitely has a very active Twitter presence. So if you go onto the Cypherbleed page on Twitter, you'll find both of us, and he's definitely worth a follow. He's much more active on Twitter than I am.
BTC Kitty has one more question.
Yes, it's not exactly a question. I wanted to give a shout out to Google Advanced Protection, which is like this little known option for your Google account, which makes it a lot more secure and like forces 2FA with physical protection keys and stuff. It's pretty cool.
Oh, I never knew
Oh,
Google did
absolutely
that.
agree with that.
I know they had
Yeah,
the
Google
2FA
does do
and
that.
I didn't know they did. You can add it to your account. Oh, well, thanks for.
Yeah, you
thanks
can
for the
just
tip.
search in their help pages for Google Advanced Protection, and then there's like some. It explains how to set it up.
Cool.
It helps to
And to be
take the
clear for
couple of
everyone
minutes
else,
to prepare. Go ahead.
you don't have to be a VIP to utilize equivalent protection to Google Advanced Protection, right? There are other steps you can take if you want equivalent levels of security. And the way that I'll
No,
always
you just
describe
click
this
on
is,
some things. I mean, they just don't advertise this option widely, but if you just click on the links, then it takes you to it, and anyone can set it up.
don't they have different tiers though for
I
particularly
didn't see
high-risk
a
persons?
different tier. I didn't see